we'll do this all night.
Hey, Tilton House, how's everybody? First things first, whoever's standing by the back window, if you could just pull the blinds. Thank you, that's helpful in distraction. Yeah, don't get it.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to our first book event at Tilton House. And we do this at every show that we do. Where are our new folks, your first timers who've never been here before? Fabulous. Thank you so much for coming out. This is going to be a really special evening. Those of you who've been here before, you know what's about to happen. We're going to talk about the only rule we have here at Tilton House, and that rule is?
Don't be an asshole.
That's it. Don't be an asshole. So for anybody who hasn't been here before, what that means is just don't be distracting to what's happening up here. You know, if you need to have a conversation, take that outside, not the arcade. We can actually hear you. This will probably be a little bit quieter event. So I'm not going to sit here and babble on. I don't think there's anything else I need to do other than introduce the amazing people that are here.
We need to reference that Fountain Books is here selling books. Andy Richardson is over by the table. Just to, if in the event you need a book, they're here for a purchase. You may want to do that because probably some people that might like to sign a book.
Yeah, you might be able to get it signed here by some wonderful people. So about those people. We are here because the wonderful Peter Jesperson wrote this book about his career in the music industry. It's amazing. I've read it. It is wonderful. He has with him tonight our dear friend Tommy Stinson, who some of you may have heard of before. And then we have another special guest who is Minneapolis radio royalty, Mary Lucia. So she'll be our moderator.
Microphone is 1, 2, 3. If you need to adjust anything, so 1, 2.
I'm only going to answer it. Who's not helping her mother bring help right now? Hey guys.
Pressure's on.
Audio. Can you hear it, Saul? Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Can you hear yourself?
That's you.
I can hear myself.
So, I've had the good fortune to know both of the gentlemen here since I was a kid, since we were kids. And it's so amazing that Peter has written this book. And I truly believe that authors are the new rock stars. And when you have a story like Peter's, it's so multi-layered and so complex, and there's just warts and all. I just have so much respect for anybody who can tell their story truthfully, real. And I'm sure you've all read the book twice, and you know that there's a lot of ground to cover. So we're just going to kind of start with a little bit of a chronology. Well, let me start with the first chronology again, which I'm blown away by. Is when a person writes a book, the first thing, one of the things you have to think of is who's going to write my foreword to the book. And that can kind of be important. And Peter got David Frick to write his, and I need to know exactly how that came about.
When the publisher said we got to start talking about a foreword, we have some suggestions. What do you think about it? And I said, well, I have a few names on my list, but there's one that I want to ask first, and if he can't do it, then we go to plan B and C or whatever. And they said, okay, and who is it? And I said, David Frick, and then, okay, good luck with that. And I sent him an email, and I would say probably 90 seconds later, I'm dying to do this. So he jumped right in. But we've known each other for a long time, so I think I met David, he talks about it in the foreword, but he was coming into Minneapolis in I think it was January of '85 to interview the replacements, to interview Paul. And I picked him up at the airport, brought him showed him our record store, Orfolk. He was, a big record guy. I knew it. I knew he'd dig the store, which he did. And then I took him across the street to the CC Club.
Sure.
And he interviewed Paul for, a couple of hours. And And he talks about it in the foreword, so you can reference that if you need to. But it was a great, yeah, I mean, I think, when he sent me the final draft of the thing, I sat at my computer and I got pretty teared up, I gotta say.
It's really beautifully written, and again, a dream person to write. A question I've wanted to ask, and now that I have both Tommy and Peter here, is so maybe we all didn't, but if you grew up around music, obsessed with music, listening to music, loving it, it was part of the DNA. Okay, where does the atom split between I'm going to play music or I'm going to do something else with music?
Well, for me, I think I did actually take drum lessons for a short time in 6th grade, and it just didn't come naturally to me, although I have a good clock in my head, and I've always been, in later years, good in the studio, working with drummers and stuff. But I think, and this might just sound like a cop-out, but I think that I fell so hard for music at such a young age that I just thought I'll never be able to play like the people that I listen to on records. And I thought, I'm a listener. I play a mean turntable.
Yeah.
I mean, but to just give my 2 cents on this, he's got the same things that I've got in terms of the drive for it. Like, I love what I do still. I love the process and all that stuff. Every day, it's part of my life. He does the same thing, only he creates with turntable and music and listens to all this different stuff, and it's very similar. I mean, writing or being that much of a fan, not all that much of a stretch in a way, as far as dedication and time, that kind of thing.
Well, you should pick up the drums again, because everyone needs a drummer. Everyone's looking for one. So you grew up and you had the obsessive love of music, and you thought you might even pursue a broadcasting career.
That's exactly right.
And what stopped that?
Well, I actually, after high school, I just thought disc jockey is what I got to do, because that's what I've done all my life. I love to play music for people, and so it seemed like the logical step. And at that time, it's funny, my son just graduated from college with a Bachelor of Science music industry degree. They didn't have such things, where I was growing up, and especially in Minneapolis. I mean, maybe if I'd been in LA or New York or something, but so disc jockey seemed to be the thing, and I did go to radio school, studied broadcasting and radio electronics, and had several job offers. I remember going to a job offer in Freeport, Illinois, and they offered me the position, and I thought, I couldn't really probably do a small town like this. It's just not my thing. So I actually turned it down. A couple months later, I got a job at a local station in Minneapolis, St. Paul, called KRSI KFMX. KRSI was a AM country station. KFMX was a soft rock station. I worked there for 15 months, and I loved the work, but I had somebody telling me what I had to play who didn't know very much about music.
And then, it's interesting to me as well, because then maybe a natural foray then is to step into the live DJing in a nightclub. And Minneapolis had this, it's so infamous and legendary, and people still always say, well, where was that exactly? Where was Jay's Longhorn?
506 5th Street, Minneapolis 5540.
Okay, so it was right next to the Lumber Exchange building?
It was, it was just sort of south of the corner of Hennepin and 5th. Okay. Under kind of partially under a parking garage.
Okay, all right.
It was a story and a half. It was a weird building that you walked in, went down a level, but then there was kind of a half-second story on the left with another bar that bands. In fact, these guys played up there some. And then, sometimes they had the game room up there. Sometimes they had the game room downstairs. And went back and forth a little bit in the early days.
It's still sitting vacant.
Yeah.
Really? Is it like?
Yeah.
It has been that way since they closed. I don't think anyone's ever that I've heard from, and I check in on this stuff once in a while, because I was kind of curious. It's a great spot. It could have been something. It's a restaurant sitting in there, just collecting dust for all these years.
John, I think there's some footage of it, isn't it, in the Longhorn documentary of Terry Katzman and Chris Osgood walking around in a disused building?
Wow, I didn't see that.
So when you got hired at the Longhorn, was it a free-for-all? I mean, was it like, Peter, you can really just spin whatever you want?
Well, the first month, the Longhorn opened June 1st, 1977, and there was no DJ for the first month. And in fact, one of my favorite memories was one of the big bands at the time was called Flamingo. In fact, they were the first band that played there. There were 3 groups that were kind of top of the heap at the time, the Suicide Commandos, Flamingo, and a guy named Kurt Olmsted who had bands with a different name every week. But at the time it was called Thumbs Up, then they became Spooks and down the road. But so the drummer of Flamingo, Bob Mead, actually made mixtapes and had a little tape deck that he plugged into one of the amplifiers. So between sets they would play these mixtapes, and I thought, this is really brilliant, this is great. But you couldn't hear it in the front bar. They didn't have really loud enough to really hear in the room properly, or wasn't good enough fidelity. And I don't even know who brought it up first, but Jay Berrien of Jay's Longhorn brought in some turntables, and Andy Schwartz was actually the first guy that spun records there. Andy was a great kind of rock and roll historian from New York that had come to school in Madison, Wisconsin, then moved to Minneapolis after he graduated. And he started writing record reviews for the Minnesota Daily, and we hired him at Orfolk, and he's just a great guy. And so he DJ'd there first for the first couple of nights, and then Jay Berrien asked me if I would spin, and I did. And Andy didn't stick with it. He was maybe after a month or so, he got tired of it, and I ended up doing it kind of on a regular basis and hiring other DJs to come in on nights that I couldn't work.
And again, this was the kind of thing that needs to be said, that, you know, at that time too, that clubs or bars, they just weren't hiring bands playing original music. And so this was sort of the first of many, but I imagine then you also received bands' tapes to be played at the club.
Well, no, we didn't play band tapes at the club.
Okay, but didn't people still try and slip you? That's
Oh, they
the
gave you
horror
tapes
being
to
a
try to
DJ.
get jobs at the club.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
okay.
yes. And really, as far as answering your question about could we play whatever we wanted, yeah, we could. And the only thing that, you know, and nobody told us we had to, but we played music to plug the upcoming shows, especially if they were the out-of-town bands.
Right, and they were great bands at that time too.
Yeah.
So, Tommy, when's the first time you were in the Longhorn?
It would have been the first show they played, which was the 2nd of July, 1980.
Oh, true.
Thank you. I wasn't taking notes.
That's crazy. Okay, so you, at this point though, maybe you were working, did you see them play?
Oh, well, yeah. So they'd given me a tape in the spring, and we'd already had Twin Tone up for, this was, like I said, spring of 1980. So Twin Tone had been up and running since the end of 1977. And they'd given me a tape in the spring, and I went absolutely bonkers over it. And I said, I would like to see you play live as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I right away, I said I'd like to record, to tell the story properly, I have to say that when I heard the tape, I loved it. It took me a couple of days to kind of calm down and make sure I was believing what I was hearing. And then I called Paul up, and when he answered the phone, I said, "This is Peter from the record store. I really like the tape. Were you thinking of doing a single or a full album?" And there was really quite a long pause, like I thought, is he still here?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden he said, "You mean you think this shit is worth recording?" Quote unquote. So I said, "Yes, I do, but I'd like to see you live as soon as possible." Said they didn't have anything scheduled at the time, and he'd let me know when they did. Called back a week or two later. Said they had a show at a place called the Bataclan, which was in a church in South Minneapolis, and it was a sober club.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So yeah, so I went to the show, and I was so excited I didn't bring anybody with me because I just thought, what if they suck or whatever. And so I remember walking up the stairs of this church, and there was this kid sitting sort of near the top of the stairs, kind of long hair, looking sort of dejected. And as I walked by, he said, "You must be Pete." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'm Chris, I'm the drummer." He said, "We just got kicked out, we ain't gonna play." And I was like, "Oh." And then I found out they had been caught with pills and liquor.
Yeah.
It's a sober club, remember? Yeah.
And,
So then I had to get him a gig, and I helped him get a gig at the Longhorn on July 2nd.
okay.
And a six-pack.
Yeah. Pills. So I'm curious because record store culture is its own phenomenon, and certainly in the early days of like 70s, 80s, in which pre-internet, pre-everything, it was a hub. It was a place that people sort of found out about other people's bands, got gigs, whatever. I mean, did you realize that while you were living in that time that this is unusual?
No, I think we did realize it. I mean, it was just the scene there was exploding. I mean, it was really like we felt as a record label when I started at Dorfolk in 1973, and so that was really the indie movement was sort of just beginning then. And our local band, the Suicide Commandos, were really the first one. They sprung up around 1975. So we were pretty well entrenched at the record store. And I've been buying a lot of, one of the things that we specialized in was imported records from other countries, especially England, with the kind of music that came out of there for so many years. And one of the things that we sold a lot of especially were the British Beatle records, which were different than the American records back then. The first 7 records were resequenced by Capitol, and some of them had different covers and stuff. And people really, wanted the records the way the Beatles had put them together. So we carried those, and we sold boxloads of them all the time.
Did they sound different as imports, fidelity-wise, too?
Well, they sounded better because they were pressed in the UK. They had they didn't press as many records off a master at that time in a smaller country.
Okay.
So, and there was better quality control than what they had in the pressing plants in America.
Wow.
So it's like, I think, if you look back at, say, even the history of classical music, a lot of people bought the Deutsche Grammophon records from Germany because they just sounded better. It was the same thing.
Wow.
With these rock records. So,
I wonder if it was the weight of the vinyl or
No.
it was just, they were just closer to the
I
original.
think that they like in America, they made a pressing master and they used it as long as it's humanly possible, whereas in, say, the UK, they would say, you know what, we limit these, for fidelity, we limit them to X number of pressings.
Okay.
And, America being America said, no, let's just press the fuck out of these.
Right. Quality, yeah, right.
Press a million out of them.
Right.
A couple of them might sound good.
So anyway, we had all these import records, and then when the indie music started coming in, the import people I bought from mostly on the East Coast were very quick to bring in these independent labels, and so we had tons of them there, and then it became sort of a thing where maybe we got to do this here in Minneapolis because there's an awful lot of groups that maybe aren't being heard by these labels from the coasts or whatever, and so we felt forced into existence, and that's how we started.
And with Twin Tone, I mean, was there a primary kind of sound you wanted to have, the kinds of bands you wanted to have, or was it just any bands that are great, eclectic, otherwise?
Any bands that were great, and I think that would be the simple answer. But then we also, there at that time, the only places where you could hear original music was the big touring bands that were playing the theaters or the Civic Center or whatever. So it was a deal where the kind of bands we wanted to record all played the Longhorn. It was the only place in town. So really it was just like, which Longhorn bands do we want to sign?
Right.
Or which Longhorn bands do we want to make records with? Before the moment we decided to make a label, and we started making a list of the artists we were interested in, and I just said to my 2 partners, I said, well, I'm not sure who else we're going to go for right away, but Kurt Olmsted is the first guy we got to record, because he was the first guy in Minneapolis that made music that that hit me as hard as the records I was buying.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with Kurt, we signed him, his band Thumbs Up, and then we signed a group called Fingerprints, who were guys who owned part of the studio, some studio gear, and they were great recordists, and they were a little bit more, what would you say, a little more precision players, a little bit of prog in them. They were very influenced by things like Roxy Music and David Bowie. So they were a cool band to work with, and a couple of the guys were guys I'd gone to high school with. I knew, that they'd been great players for a number of years already. And then we signed a group of young upstarts called the Suburbs, who ended up becoming the biggest band in Minneapolis for a long time, and they're still playing. They're still great.
Yeah.
So that's how we started the label with those 3. But it was, you had to sign the ones that made the hair on your wrist, and your arm stand up.
Yeah, and then so obviously not having been able to see them play the Sober House, you saw them with the Longhorn, and in your mind at this point too, I mean, after you heard this tape that blew you away, were you thinking, yes, of course I would love them to be on my label, but were you even imagining I'd like to manage them? No. How did that come up?
Well, I think because when they came along, I mean, really, when I saw them play that first time, it was, you know, I was just plain shocked. I mean, it was like, okay, this is everything I love about rock and roll going on right here. It was clearly in early stages, and you want to say they got better, but I don't know if they really got better. They just fine-tuned it a little bit in their own way. And so, I mean,
that was the problem. We never really did get better.
But yeah, so it was just so anyway, they start playing. They get a lot of attention. There were a lot of people telling them, "You need to do this. You need to do that." And I was kind of on the sidelines saying, "You need to do that.
Right,
You don't need. There's no rules to this thing." And that guy, you know, is a nice guy, and I'm sure he's well intentioned, but you don't need to do that.
Right.
And so finally, we ended up having an argument because of that very thing with the manager of the Longhorn, who had a bad habit of not filling the calendar properly all the time. So he'd go, oh shit, it's Sunday and I don't have a band for Wednesday. And then he'd call up a bunch of people. And a lot of times it was, I hate to say this, but it was the Hipsters. And it was a band I really loved, but they would play any time and they overplayed, you know, because of that. And then I saw him start to do that to the Replacements, and I started getting in the way. And I just said, so at one point he was offering him a date, and I said, I don't think you should do this because it's just, you don't have time to promote it yourself. You're just gonna, you know, he'll pay you $100 and you'll have whoever happens to walk in the bar that night. And Hartley was the guy's name, and he just got really upset. And you know, the band's sitting here and I'm over here and Hartley's here, and Hartley goes, you'll have to talk to this guy every time I want to book you. And Paul looks at me kind of like, can I say yes?
Right.
And I nodded and I said, yeah. And Paul said, yes you do, and that was it. So I never really, it wasn't like they said, he's our manager.
Right.
I was just the guy that got in the way of the Hartleys of the world.
And you still work there for a bit
Sure.
after that.
I did.
And that went over.
I quit when Hartley started treating you like shit.
Yeah, maybe sit in the kitchen.
So what, I mean, when most people think anyways in terms of like a startup band, a startup label, a burgeoning scene at this point, you know, it seems like play live, put out a record, then tour. But everybody doesn't do it in that order, and sometimes it's more important to just get out and play live, have people see you, create some interest and buzz. Then when your record comes out, you hit that time again. So when you guys first went out on the road, had the record come out? A single or what?
We didn't really get on the road. The first record came out in the fall of '81, Sorry Mom. Came out in September of '81 or end of August '81. And so the band had not played much out of town. I think we played, you know, it would be like, you know, going to Duluth, Minnesota. We went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I think we played St. Cloud, you know, at the college up there. In fact, we hadn't even gone as far as Madison, Wisconsin yet, which became a big place for these guys to play. Yeah, so I mean, it took a while to get going, and also, you know, Tommy was still in junior high.
I know.
So I actually, one of my favorite memories was he went to Ann Watton Middle School, and he'd have to get out of school early to go to a gig. You know, if we were driving to Duluth or whatever it was, and so we pull up in this ratty van, and all of these kids are coming out of school, and Tommy walks out of school with the kids and gets in this van with these scary-looking guys. And it was a pretty funny experience. We'd be laughing our butts off in the van. I mean, I think that, you know, little by little we got out of town. Husker Du took us to Madison the first time, took us to Chicago the first time. And it wasn't until '83 that I really felt the heat that, God, we got to get these guys on the road, or you know, they're not going to be speaking to me much longer. And so I started trying to look for dates out east. We thought we'd go to New York area first. And I ended up getting it was a very bizarre circumstance, but there was a guy who booked a lot of bands in First Avenue. His name was Frank Riley, and he worked for a company in New York called Singer Management, run by Bob Singerman. And he had all the cool bands at the time. He had the Ray Beats, and he had the DBs, and he had Television. And it was an amazing roster that he had, and I knew of him. And he called, suddenly one day at the record store, the phone rings. I go, over folk. He goes, is Peter Jesperson there? I said, yeah, this is he. And he said, this is Frank Riley. He said, I'm with Singer Management in New York. I book a lot of bands in First Avenue. Steve McClellan, who runs the club there, tells me that he calls you to ask what bands are cool to book and all that stuff, and then you often endorse my bands. I would like to reciprocate. Can I help you get your band out east? So here's a time when the band has no real track record, and they were not the easiest guys to work with. They were slightly unmanageable or very unmanageable. So booking agents weren't really drawn to them, shall we say. So all of a sudden in January of '83, we have a national booking agent, and that was the trajectory completely changed at that point. And Frank booked the first trip, and we went out east in April of 1983, and that's when things really kicked in.
Okay, so then Tommy,
Does that answer your question?
yes, it does. But it leads into Tommy. How did then you get out of school and get into bars? Who was your legal guardian?
Well, so all of this is going on, and we're kind of picking up steam, as a band and all that. And my mom, we took it to my mom, and said, I went to her. I said, I'm not doing great in school anyway, but it'd be great if you'd let me drop out so I could go on the road and pursue this. And she thought, well, one, it would keep me out of jail. Two, it seemed like we're getting somewhere. We're kind of building a little bit of crowd, a little bit of scene and stuff like that. And she did it. She went for it. And I don't think she really regretted it much, but maybe those couple phone calls were like needed a flight home from them, but those never had to be followed through with anyway.
And Peter, so your position with the band, you were with them, you were going on tour with them and everything, and trying to do the best job you could with a very unpredictable band that, predictably unpredictable. And so, did you feel like a lot of times you were trying to, I want to say calm the situations down, or were you just like, no, this is who they are, this is what you booked, and maybe we'll see you later sometime?
I think it was a combination of both. I definitely tried to calm things down, and when things were getting out of hand, I tried to remain calm and just try to make sure that we were putting one foot in front of the other, and that nobody was getting hurt.
Right.
But yeah, it was those little jaunts early on were tantalizing, and we wanted more, and we didn't know how to do it, and so suddenly we've got a booking agent that's getting us out of town. Tommy's mom and I always got along, and so when we ran into there was the issue of him being, a minor and, crossing state lines in a situation like that, so we decided, she said, why don't we sign guardianship papers? I will give you guardianship. And so I still have the document. It was actually, it's not actually a formal legal document. I wrote up the wording.
It's something Michael Cohen would have written out.
Yeah. Like a yellow legal pad.
I wrote. She and I formulated the language, and she said, I, Anita Stinson, mother of the minor, hereby give Peter Jesperson, guardianship or whatever for the tour purpose of touring. And we took it to a notary public and had it stamped and signed. And it's funny because when I look back on it, I didn't remember this, but it's dated Valentine's Day, 1982. And so, and it was a completely not legal sort of document, but it worked because I could whip it out, when this bar owner was getting, creepy or if, the police were asking questions or whatever, and it seemed to work. So it got us through the period where he was underage.
Yeah, and band management is, to sometimes can be thankless. There's a lot of stuff you end up doing that clearly the band doesn't want to do. And
I'm talking to the guy that took a
yeah. And when did you start feeling like this is the part of the job I'm not loving?
Well,
I want to hear this one.
First off, it was at the beginning. It was really great because I didn't feel like the manager. It was like, okay, there's 5 of us, and there's 4 guys in the band, and they do their thing, and I just wanted to do the other thing so that they could focus on writing the songs and playing the shows and making the records, So, but then, at a certain point, I think that, when things weren't getting better fast enough, Paul especially would get frustrated, and that was a hard situation. That's when it started to get a little uncomfortable for me, to be honest. But he didn't really help matters a whole lot, because he would want things to be done properly, and then he'd do a very drunk show that had people storming out of the club and wonder why they weren't getting someplace faster. And I was like, well, let's see.
Yeah.
So it just things became difficult. one of the other things that, they made Sorry Ma, which I thought was a great record. They made Stink, which I thought was a great record. And the major labels weren't knocking. They made Hootenanny, which was an even better record. And I was like, where are these people? What are they thinking?
Mhm.
We had to make 4 fucking records
Yeah.
before the major labels came along. And
We had to.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it was
thankfully.
just hard to believe that, that somebody wouldn't have recognized what was going on sooner than that. But
I think you hit on that first thing. I think that it's no secret that we lit ourselves, off before we got a lot of opportunities to say the least.
Yeah. So I think, when things weren't improving, at first it was 5 of us, then we hired Tom Carlson to help Paul Gear, and then, when we went out east, we brought on Bill Sullivan too, so there were 7 of us in a van with all the gear. I think by the 2nd or 3rd tour, we actually thought, let's get a trailer, and so we had, 7 of us in the van and all the gear in a trailer, which was like, wow, all right, we've got a little elbow room. You try to make it a little better each time. Then, going to Sire was, it kicked into a whole different kind of gear, and that was hard for me because I'd never, aspired to be their manager, and suddenly I'm dealing with, Warner Brothers accountants in New York, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. And so we actually hired proper management, and it was funny, we put out the shingle, as they say, saying the replacements are looking for management. Nobody responded.
Yeah.
And then we had 3 people come in. One was a guy named Gary Kurfirst, who did, people really out of our league at the time, like Talking Heads and things like that. And I don't think he even took a meeting. And then we interviewed with a guy named Mike Lembo, who was a publisher, manager guy. And I think he was, he came into Minneapolis for a meeting, and that didn't go well.
Mhm.
And
What did he end up doing? He had a career after that.
he had a career before and after, and he's still around. He lives in LA now. I mean, he did everybody from NRBQ to, Jules Shear to.
I knew there was a reason why we looked at it.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But anyway, we ended up getting our lawyer. At that time, we'd hired a lawyer named George Regis, who was a New York City attorney, and he said there's these guys who have these young guys who have a new management company called High Noon, and they had a group called the Del Fuegos, and we loved the Del Fuegos, and so we had a meeting with them, and it was like it was one of those things where they came to town, and it really is like you just can't imagine how these things went. But I do remember at one point driving. I think Gary Habib was driving his rental car, and a couple of us were in the car, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tommy was in the back seat and put his hands over Gary's eyes as he was driving. And everybody had been drinking, and for some reason they didn't run screaming from get back to New York, and they said, yes, we'd like to do this.
They passed the hazing
Yeah.
ritual.
So anyway, they got hired, and that's why that was in the middle of the Tim album.
Okay. And Tommy, do you remember any actual fires in the van?
I don't remember that part. I do remember, things like, tying the string, the Metal Army string bucket that we had to Bob's shoelaces when he got in the van. He'd tripped and dragged his thing to the shop to be drunk or whatever. Some of the shenanigans we had, but I don't remember that one.
Okay.
I remember a fire in the van.
Yeah.
There was one that I remember, and it was for some reason nobody read the newspaper, for God's sake, but we had a Sunday newspaper, and so there was a lot of newspaper in the back, and they decided it would be really fun to shred it. So they shredded the entire Sunday newspaper from whatever city we were in, and then somebody lit it on fire.
Mhm.
I was driving. That was difficult.
So then, after the Sire stuff, and you got a little bit of relief with George and with the management and stuff, did you feel then you were, the opportunities were coming towards you to do other things with other people?
No. I mean, it was really, at that time, I was still all in with the replacements, and the way I saw it, and this is very naive of me, and I admit it now, and I wonder what the hell I was thinking at the time, but, we brought in business management. I figured I'd stay as personal manager, and about 6 months later, Paul called a meeting and said, I'm not happy with the way things are going, and I want to, and he said, here's the kind of what he said, quote unquote, he said, I want to start swinging when I'm mad. I don't want you to be in the way catching any punches. And so I was basically asked to leave.
He
Very
said-
difficult.
He said, what was that again?
He said, I want to start swinging when I'm unhappy, and I don't want you to be in the way catching any punches.
Wow.
This is you and me and him sitting at the Uptown Bar. So anyway, so that was just, of course, I didn't see that coming, blindsided, and I didn't feel very good about it, to be honest.
No.
So
And then would you say your response, other than just, personal loss, because this was a lot of your life had been invested in, you had
6 years of it, yeah.
and a real love and affection for them, for the music, for the experience. So was it like straight to the hooch and the
It was,
drugs?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
For everyone. For everyone, literally.
Yeah, it was. I call it my slow chicken shitted attempt to commit suicide by alcohol.
Right.
Yeah, for about 4 years.
And you were living, you weren't at the Modesto then?
I was.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Okay. And,
Until, well, I think I did move at a certain point there, but yeah.
okay, so, and a lot of times, when you are feeling that way and you're sort of self-medicating, I mean, obviously you're isolating yourself as well. Did you have people knocking on your door going, wondering about you?
Oh, sure, yeah, definitely. But I also had a lot of people that were enabling me too. I mean,
Of
it was,
course.
and you have to think about the time too. It was a one big party for several years there, and so I got good and sick, and finally stopped. Had to go to treatment. Got very sick. Actually ended up in the hospital. Long story, intensive care, the whole bit. For a while. But I came out and I just said, wow, I didn't die. That's great. I got more records to work on. Let's get going.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Yeah. And in the treatment center, is in essence where euphoric recall came in. For people who maybe don't know the expression or the meaning, and I don't know if it's as pertains strictly to addiction. Can you use it in another?
I don't.
area?
I think that the term, comes from, addiction, dialogue. But yeah, there was a point in I did a 3-week, 21-day treatment program at St. Mary's downtown Minneapolis, and I had a counselor who was a very nice woman, but she was just very square, and she used a lot of sort of treatment jargon.
Yeah, sure.
And it was just like I just didn't buy her thing. And one day when we had a group talk about all of our war stories about how fucked up we'd gotten in the past or whatever, after it was over, she took me firmly by the arm and walked me into her office and slammed the door and said, "Peter, you were exhibiting euphoric recall." And she said, "This is a slippery slope because that you start to think back on it fondly and you can start drinking again." I said, "You don't understand. I'm never having another drink this morning."
But besides that, don't you think it's a lot more honest to say when I was drunk and using? A lot of times were really fun.
That's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said.
Don't shoot me.
I said I had a lot of fun doing it
Yeah.
until it wasn't fun
Of
anymore.
course, of
And I
course.
should have stopped, and I did.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so you're getting your shit together, and Tommy, I'm sure this all left you in an awkward place, as bands do, because again, it's either 2 against 1, 3 against 1, the whole thing and dynamic, but it's like, you wanted to play music, probably more than anybody in that band. I think that's a safe bet to say, don't you think?
Pretty close.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we all wanted to play it, but I think that I was probably the most gung-ho on, yeah, let's do this, and we had our curmudgeonly fucking dynamic. I mean, we weren't like the most fun guys to be around, and we were very insular, and we had our own little clique. We were like our thing, and I think, and you said this the other day, Peter, Chris, and Bob and I probably hung out more because we would end up, Bob and I particularly would end up down the street from Fort Chocobus, so we'd go down there and hang out, and Bob read the paper and all the rock racks sit in the corner. I did the same at Skip School to watch the soap operas and things like this, one spin records and all that, and it was a whole scene. Yeah.
And it's tough too, because you can't, even though you're a unit, but you don't think the same, you don't feel the same. At some point, someone wants to move into some other direction, and it would be impossible for everyone to be on board at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, we all hung out with Peter in different ways, and I think you and Paul's relationship was and one day he's going to admit that you know those days were a lot more meaningful than he'll admit. But you know, you cannot sit there and tell me that he didn't derive a lot of information and inspiration out of those Modesto sessions where we'd just sit in Peter's apartment, he'd just spin records and like tell you why this is so great and explain to him. And I would just be sitting like, wow. But and Bob too, and Crystal point too, I suppose. But I think you and Paul probably did that more together, but more just the two of you.
Yeah.
You know.
That was the thing. I think that I'd hang around with you and Bob, you know, more like at the store. Paul and I would hang around endless hours in my apartment listening to records.
We're going back and forth to the CC and doing that whole hang.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And you know, it's hard because personal feelings, well, you can't even say personal feelings aside when it's something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, you got through this period where it was like, and I'm still interested in working with musicians and bands. And did you feel in a sense, I might just have to leave this town before I can do it?
No, you know, I mean,
We didn't drive him that
Oh,
nuts.
come on.
We weren't that bad. We were real close though.
yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I gotta admit, I should have, you know, been better at working with the band and not drinking so much. And I should have also realized that at some point, it's almost like, I guess sometimes I think about it like, you know, moving out of your parents' house, you know, so you gotta do it one day, right? And that's kind of what they wanted to do. You know, we'd been, you know, tight as a drum for 6 years. You know, we were living in each other's back pockets and you know, driving down the highways of, you know, the U.S. of A. You know, one of those, I look back on it and I thought, you know, I should have stepped out quietly on my own, and I didn't, and that's the way it worked. And, you know, it took a little bit of time to repair our friendships, but, you know, we all got to be friends again, and so it wasn't an issue, and I didn't have to leave town. And there was lots of other incredible musicians in town that I wanted to work with, so, you know, it was, there was lots of things right for the picking.
I have a good story that I refrained from telling the last time we had this chat, but you also worked at a radio station that I worked at. My first radio job ever was called Rev 105, and I used to be your board op when you hosted your specialty show, which meant Peter just got to talk and be cool, and I was the fool running everything up.
Well, you were on the air before me.
Yes. And we would take calls in those days, not on the air live, but just hit the speakerphone if somebody was calling for a request or something. And you may not remember this, but you were on air, you did a break, I answered the phone on speaker, and it was like just some troll that was like, this sucks, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I looked at you, and I was like 23, and I looked at you and said, that guy, that he doesn't know anything, and you said, but he sounded cool. It just warms my heart. That memory was just...
I don't remember that.
I know you don't.
Voice or something?
It was, but anyway, so, all right. At what point then in your life and career did the idea of moving west?
Well, let's see. Twin Tone, you know, we did a lot of records through the end of the 80s. In the early 90s, we were having some financial difficulties, and there was an LA-based company called Restless Records that were trying to expand their catalog by acquiring catalogs of other small independent labels. And so they came to Minneapolis. They went around the country. I know they went to DC, talked to the Discord people. I don't know if they talked to the Sub Pop folks up in Seattle yet or not. Anyway, they ended up in Minneapolis. We had some discussions. It seemed like a good deal. We signed with them. They were LA based, so I ended up starting to work out in LA more often. I'd been out there a lot with these guys.
Right.
But it would be, you know, pulling into town, doing a show, and leaving the next morning kind of thing, generally speaking. So I grew to like LA in a way that I hadn't liked it before.
We hated LA.
Oh, we hated it when we first went there. We called it the armpit of America. Couldn't figure out where to get anywhere from one place to the other, and it was so huge, you know, you just didn't know where you were half the time, you know?
Yeah.
So I've lived there for almost 30 years now. I love it, but, you know, it's
Back
fun.
then, to be fair, I mean, we'd come through, and we were kind of not in the hardcore music scene, the punk scene. We were kind of inadvertently, because that's the only scene that kind of embraced us a little bit, but we weren't part of it. We weren't like with it, we weren't, didn't have to buy it.
Slogans.
Yeah, the tattoos and all that crap, we weren't doing the thing.
So, okay, so in Los Angeles, obviously then the more you went, the more you visited, the more people you met, you could see yourself living there.
I could, and also I started, after I came out of treatment, I started a spin-off label for Twin Tone called Medium Cool. I was doing some other records with Tommy's band Perfect. I did 2 Slim Dunlap records. I found a guy in a little town in Winder, Georgia by the name of Jack Logan that I spent, ballistic over, and started making records with him, and there was about, 10 artists on the label. So the people at Restless in LA were very supportive of that, and so it was better for me to be in their faces talking about these bands than to be talking to them on the telephone. So I spent more and more time there, and then I met a girl. And she worked for Warner Brothers Records, and I thought, Warner probably isn't moving to Minneapolis anytime soon, and I had the opportunity to actually move here, and so I did.
Yeah.
And we just had our 27th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
He was my best man.
Yeah.
Well, and that is interesting because, Peter, you and Tommy continue to have more of a working relationship as well as a friendship post-replacements. And how did that feel different to you, Tommy, when you weren't in the replacements, but you were still working with Peter, who you obviously grew up with, but you were working on your other stuff, your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, after the replacements, and we kind of reformed or got together again when he moved to LA in particular.
Tommy was living in LA by then.
Yeah, although I lived there, and it was just natural. Because here's the guy that's like turned me on to every musical fucking notion I had at that point, and built and I kind of built my musical tastes and repertoire and stuff about from my experiences, and he was a huge part of all of that. So it was just a natural thing, and so starting to play his music like we always did, and get his 2 cents, and he's kind of always been my executive producer, if you will. Like I send him demos and wacky shit all the time. Just what do you think of this? And I trust his 2 cents on everything. So
Yeah.
It was a little interesting too because Tommy was still looking, major labels were still keeping an eye on him, and it looked like, he had done the Fashion Pop record for Sire. That deal had ended. So he was putting a new band together and looking for a label, and while he was shopping it, he gave me some solo demos that he had done, and I was just like, holy cow,
Yeah.
these are fabulous. And I said, in the meantime, while you're looking for the label for your band, why don't we work on a solo record with Twin Tone through Restless here in LA? And so that's what we started doing. And a few months into it, we got tired of waiting. Tommy got tired of waiting for the major labels to put the contract on the table. And so I said, do you want to just do the rock band with us instead? And so we did that.
Tommy, did you ever have a day job in Los Angeles?
I did.
What? Sweet.
So I went dead broke real shortly after I moved there, probably 2 years of being there. I was like, oh, okay, and I wasn't gonna sit there and try and live off my girlfriend, who I was very much in love with, and I went out and scoured the streets of LA. I went looking in the hotels to be a bellman, or I thought the hotels would be a good place to start, to be probably an easy place to get in. I thought I was completely wrong. And I started to get kind of desperate, and then I looked in the back of the LA Weekly or whatever, and found a telemarketing job. And it was just basically, the ad was like this: starting pay $7 an hour with bonuses as you go. Here, blah blah blah, and it just seemed like, all right. So, and I went there, and I tried it out, and I actually, met a couple guys that were. When you work, what I was working with was jailbirds. I mean, it's a get on the phone, cold calling to sell toner for your printing machines and stuff like that, calling businesses and stuff like that. And I had a teacher, this guy Steve, and he showed me the ropes. And I got good at it, which was weird. I mean, and it was actually very pivotal for me though, because going from the insular sort of socially inept replacement background to now I got to get a phone, I've got to try and sell a product, and you know, we were selling an okay product, I think, for all practical purposes, but I didn't know what I was doing, and I got good at selling myself in that regard. I think I learned how to do that and sell the stuff. I got kind of good at it, and it kept me afloat. And at the time of that, it was good because I was also writing and working, you know, on new music and stuff. I just took the heat off it.
Yeah.
So that I was more freed up mentally. I'm gonna go to a job here, and that's gonna be compartment one. I'm gonna go here, you know, and I'm very much like that. I work, you know, I'm just a very fragmented person that works on what's in front of me, move on over here, you know, that kind of thing. Right.
And so with Restless, did you feel you had freedom?
I did. Well, I mean, they licensed a certain number of titles from Twin Tone. It was about, oh, that's not important, but they licensed a large number of titles at first, and then we reduced it in a couple of years, changing the contract. But they were just really supportive, and they didn't. There was no discussion of them having any kind of, you know, say over what I was doing. I was just doing the records, and they liked all the things I was bringing them, so there was no issue until 1997, when we had actually been spending some time down in Memphis making a record with Tommy's band Perfect, with Jim Dickinson producing, and it was, you know, it was one of the greatest at that time. I think the best work he'd ever done. Several songs that I thought were just totally radio friendly. Same time I was working on a record with Jack Logan in Atlanta. That also was a big step for, it was his third record, it was a big step for him, and I thought this one had more legs than the kind of roughshod home demo recordings that we did on the early records. And so I thought, geez, both of these things are feeling really good. And then I had to go in, this was a great, it was actually one of my true Spinal Tap moments that I actually treasure now.
Yeah.
They hired a new radio guy at Restless, and his name, I'm not going to tell you his name. Anyway, he was very buttoned up, and he came from the major labor world, and we did not get along. And he called me into his office, and he said, you know, I don't hear a slam dunk at radio with this Perfect stuff. And I was like, this is so weird.
This is
great. I should have this on camera.
Right, I know.
I don't hear a slam dunk. Okay. You know, there was like 3 or 4 songs that I could easily have gone on the radio with the right radio promotion guy.
Right.
Not him, but the other guy.
Right, I mean, and
So-
all the clowns you meet along the way, you know, I mean, yes, we should just compile one book about the dumbest shit somebody about our,
Give War and Peace a run.
Yeah.
And then about a month or so later, George, the president of Restless, called me into his office, and he said, we don't want to put the Perfect record out or the Jack Logan record out. And I was like, wow, well, I didn't realize that they had veto power on the records that were on my label.
Well, right, so how did that work?
So I left.
Yeah.
And then he called me up and he said, aren't you coming to work anymore? And I said, no, I'm not going to enter the building until I go in to take my stuff out of the office. And he said, well, we need to talk. And I said, I'm not walking back in there. If you want to meet me, you can meet me at Barney's Beanery.
Okay.
And he came to Barney's Beanery. We had a talk, and I just said, this is just not working. I'm unhappy about this, and, you know, best of luck. I'm gone.
Right.
And that was it.
Right.
And then, you know, for me, it was actually, I was kind of ready to go anyway. Tommy was pissed off, took an audition with a band called Guns N' Roses, and did that for 15 years.
And it was what was good about that is that it was, on the one hand, when we got signed to Restless to do the Perfect record, that's when I quit my telemarketing job. So here I am, okay, we've got a deal, we're going to do the thing. And I remember walking home from my job. I walked, it was way out in the valley in LA, and I walked all the way to Ventura Boulevard from like Roscoe and Jesus, way out there. Anyway, and it was just, I was like freed up. Okay, now we're gonna go do the thing. And then I think it was really like I got home from that, and it was like, wah, 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 and the whole story. And it was just by happenstance that the whole Guns N' Roses thing came up. It was kind of a lark that I even did it for a sound, for an audition or whatever. But it was, what was good about it was we had all done so much. Peter, all of us in the band, and we really kind of were on a bit of a high until that moment. It was like, at that point, I had just got to step back and go, I just want to go play bass for a while. Just
Right.
to regroup, you know, and it worked out really great for me. It maybe a little longer than I should have, but it was good, great experience.
Yeah. And so, Peter, then, I mean, you know, at this point, too, in your career and your personal life, everything, but you're known to a lot of bands through other people in the music industry. Now, did you start getting deluges of other bands who wanted you to manage stuff?
No, I didn't really, I certainly had people asking me to do that, but I quickly said I'm not a manager. I mean, I did it twice in my life. After the Replacements, I did it with another band from Toronto called 13 Engines, and I love that band. But I just realized it was not my calling. So no, I didn't take any. Whenever anybody asked me about it, I would just say it's you're talking to the wrong guy. But yeah, so then it was just you know, I left the Restless thing, which meant leaving all my twin tone masters behind, which was a very hard thing to do because they were still under license to Restless. And I spent a year trying to figure out what I was going to do. I actually thought about maybe not doing music related stuff for a minute, but I kept getting drawn in for one reason or another. And then I had a call from a guy who was starting a new record label. A year later, I left Restless in '98. A year later, I get a call from a guy who was from Vancouver, British Columbia, but living in LA, and he had just started a new record label called New West Records, and it was a one-man company, and he said, would you like to come and help me make records? And I said, well, let's meet and talk about it, and I met him, and I liked him immediately. And it was kind of an interesting thing because I remember looking at him, and again at Barney's Beanery. It's a great place to hang.
We all did all our big business at Barney's.
First major label meeting we ever had for the Replacements was at Barney's with Bob Biggs from Slash Records. I remember. But anyway, it's a great West Hollywood bar where, Judy Garland used to hang.
Plenty of exits.
Bukowski. What did they say? What's the filmmaker wrote Pulp Fiction there?
Quentin Tarantino.
Tarantino.
That would make sense.
Anyway, it's a great place. Barney's Beanery. I meet Cameron Strang there, the owner of New West Records, and I remember saying, so you're just starting. I'd had a record label for 20 years by that time. And I said, what is your intention here? What's your goal? And he kind of stopped and kind of looked off into space for a minute, and he said, I'd like to create a place where people can make a living doing what they love to do.
Okay, that's an amazing thing in theory, but...
And I did it for 17 years.
Yes, you did, which is great. And the interesting thing I think about your transition to New West was the actual bands definitely had more of the sort of the Americana country bent to it. And has that always been a part of your love for music that you just hadn't been able to work with any of those bands directly?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the first music I listened to before I really had my aha moment was, you know, the Beatles in 1964. You know, I loved a lot of stuff before that, the Everly Brothers and Elvis and you know, Peter, Paul, and Mary or whatever. And my big brother was a folk guy, so I listened to a lot of folk music. So that was a roots-based stuff, you know, roots-based music. And that's just the direction Cameron wanted to go. And I, you know, it was in the first place, you know, he had about 10 records out by that time, and one of the artists was Billy Joe Shaver, arguably one of the greatest songwriters I've ever heard. And I was like, well, this, you know, nothing wrong with working with Billy Joe Shaver. And he also had a guy named Stephen Bruton who made really cool records of his own, but was best known as Chris Christopherson's lead guitar player, the Prince of Austin, Texas, one of the greatest, you know, human beings I've ever known. And so with those two guys, I just thought this is a solid base here. And we just started making records, and it was really fun. I mean, we, you know, he was very ambitious, and he was fearless, and both of us were. We made some offers to some artists that, you know, we had no business even talking to, but we tried everything. And I remember walking in my office one day and saying, I think we should try to sign Delbert McClinton. And I don't know if anybody's hit to Delbert McClinton, but, you know, one of the best harmonica players on the planet, great kind of roadhouse blues, kind of rock and roll guy, and had been around for a while, had been through the major label system, and was interested in talking to us. And it was a big gamble for us, and it cost us a little more money than the other little records we were making, but we worked really hard on it, and we made a record we really thought was great. put it out in 2001. It's called Nothing Personal, and we won a Grammy for it.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, we were off to the races.
Yeah.
I was very excited.
Okay, so throughout that tenure there, you know, it's obviously, it's like maybe it even reignited just that love that you initially had, minus so much of the headache and the red tape and everything that you had experienced.
I wouldn't say reignited, because I'd never, you know, it had never been unignited, you know, I mean, I've never, you know, music has always been the first thing in front of my, you know,
Right.
head, so, anyway.
And so let me ask you, how early did people start approaching you about writing a book?
Well, I left New West in 2016, and and I just went freelance, and that was it was a great time. It felt very freeing. New West basically wanted to leave LA and go to Nashville, and I love Nashville, but I didn't want to live there. And so I stayed in LA, and at one point in March of a couple years go by, and I was doing lots of different stuff, working with different bands, indie bands, unsigned bands, and we put out a record, you may recall, with the Suicide Commandos, made a new record, our first record in 39 years, and we resurrected our label Twin Tone to put that out in 2017. That was real fun. And in 2018, I got an email from a guy at a publisher, not the one that did the book, but another publisher, and said, would you like to write a memoir of your work in music? And I remember, like, what? You know, like, is this for real? And it was a legit publisher. I mean, I was blown away.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know, I lurched from, you know, who am I kidding, to yes, I can do this for quite a while. But we ended up getting into sort of business together without signing a contract. And I worked with these people for 8-10 months. And I really liked the guys that I worked with, and they helped me a huge deal. And then I kept having people tell me, you know, there might be, you know, a Minnesota-based publisher that you might get more kind of support out of because of your local, you know, you're having worked there for so long and your history there. And so I thought, you know, I'm just going to kind of mention that to another guy who I knew had written for this publisher that's on the poster here, the Minnesota Historical Society Press. And I said, would you introduce me to one of the editors over there, the managing editor? And he said, I'd love to. And so we did an email thing, and this guy said, I would love to talk to you. We talked for, I don't know, probably an hour. I said, let me think about this for a minute. You think about it, we'll talk again. Came back to me, and he put a contract on the table. And I said, okay, well, I got to talk to the people that I've been talking to for the last 10 months. I said, look, there's an offer here. I don't want to do anything behind your back. They said, can we make a counteroffer? I said, yeah, they did. It wasn't as good.
Yep.
So I ended up going with them, and I started writing seriously probably in late 2019, and it was about a 3.5-year process. And I actually, I was able to, I squirreled some money away. My wife helped me, you know, just sort of make ends meet. And I said, because I don't want to do this while I'm doing anything else. I want my job to be writing. And so I got up every morning, fed the cats, made my coffee, and I went back and sat down. I did that for 3.5 years, and it was really one of the greatest experiences I've ever had.
Before you handed in your final manuscript, did you ever have a point where you were reading it and just went, oh, I hate this. I hate this.
No, I didn't. The problem for me was really that there was so much overlap in the story, because it was like, you know, there was the record store overlapped with the Replacements, who overlapped with the Longhorn, who overlapped with, you know, this and that. I mean, it was really hard to figure out how to put it all together. So no, and I really love the writing. It's funny, I was thinking about this, one of the writers from the Algonquin Round Table in New York back in the 40s, Dorothy Parker, famously said, I hate writing, I love having written.
Yes.
And I love the writing, and I love having written. So it was a little different. But anyway, it was a really cool experience. But the funny thing about it was I had lost track of what I was contracted to write. I was contracted for 75,000 words.
Yeah.
And when I turned in the manuscript, it was 163,000 words. And
that's because you got dates and years and all of the time stamp of when something happened, your incredible mind. That's a lot to take out.
Yeah, so basically I thought, here I'm turning in the manuscript, and now I can relax for a little bit while he, you know, figures out what to do with it and how we begin. I'll have at least a couple of weeks to get my head together. And he shot me an email back in about 2 hours and said, you have to cut this in half. So I knocked it down to about 100,000 words, and then I said, I can't get it any lower than this. And then over the editing process, I think the finished book's about 87,000 words.
You know, it seems so harsh when an editor says, you have to cut this in half because you feel a sense of loss. But the thing I've realized is, no, those words are still there.
Yeah.
You wrote them. They can be used somewhere else.
Maybe.
They didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
It feels like, oh, you just took an axe and went, you know what? You wrote those words. They're still there. They're yours. So
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
they show up somewhere else or whatever.
Yeah, it was, I think, I think it's too short. I think we edited too, basically he gave me the practical side of it, which I thought was really, I understood what he was saying, and he and I butted heads a lot during the process, but I appreciate the work that he did, and he helped me make it into a book. It was, he said people don't, long books don't sell. You want to come in around 300 pages, and also longer books cost more to manufacture, and that puts the list price up. There are practical reasons to keep it at a more manageable, word count. And at that point, I was like, okay, let's go, let's do it. And so, then so that's what we did.
So you started these book tours, and it's been since last fall?
Yeah.
And
you and I did the first one.
We did the first one with the Electric Fetus, and it was, it's really cool because, of course, that is a very different feeling when you're in front of your friends and family, hometown.
Yep.
But as you go around and you meet these different people, do you find people are more interested in different parts of the book in your life?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think it was an interesting question yesterday. We were in Raleigh. We did one of these in Raleigh, and David Menconi, author and former writer for the Raleigh Daily Paper, great guy, great moderator, said, why do you think the replacements, I mean, obviously the book is about more than just the replacements, but he said, why do you think the replacements are still, why are people still writing books about them? And I said, that's a really tough question. I guess maybe because they're so fucking good, because I don't know what else to say. But it's that's like, one of those things where going around and doing these things is so gratifying, because when we were making those first records, I mean, I'm sure, I remember within 3-4 months, I'm sure, maybe just as we were starting to make that first record, I got a lot of shit from people who had been giving Twin Tone demos and wanted to get a record deal, and here are these guys who've never played a gig in a proper bar before.
Oh, yeah.
Suddenly we're getting a record deal. And I think I wagged my finger at one of them and I said, someday people are going to be writing books about these guys.
Yeah.
And at that time, I'm sure it was hyperbole to me, but I also, there was a part of me that really believed it. And so it's amazing, it's amazing that people still care so much. And it's great that, Tommy's got a great new record out, a great new band, so it's fun for us to do these things together.
Yeah, tell us about your band, Tommy.
I have a question before I do that.
Yeah.
So when you were editing your own, you didn't have someone kind of come in and like go over and go, maybe this part, you didn't really have any help in that. You had to just kind of go through and decipher what you thought you could edit out that wouldn't fuck with the story. I mean,
when I think about it, I really wish that he would have taken the time to read it but at the same time, I understand. He said, Peter, I don't have the bandwidth to edit a 163,000 word book. I've got other books that I'm editing at the same time, so I understood that. And so I had to make basic wholesale chops. It was not line editing, it was taking out huge sections.
Yeah, I just wondered about that, because that just seems like, well, if it were me, I would have wanted someone to be objective that would know, like, well, this would be so interesting, is this part or that, but you could do that on your own after writing all this shit. But I can't imagine what that would have, to be your own editor after.
My first reaction was actually to go lay down in the middle of the nearest busy intersection. My brain couldn't really comprehend doing it, but after a couple of days, I just did it. And, I wanted to edit it quickly. Because I didn't want to push the book release back again, because I
3 years is a long fucking time to work that hard on something, to be honest.
So I just got down to business. I mean, I had a couple people give me a hand and with some things, but mostly I just did it all myself, and it was.
Did you talk to Jennifer about like what do you think if I ditch this part?
Oh,
You
of
must have
course.
someone to bounce that stuff out. I just can't imagine that.
Yeah, both
Yeah.
of them were really helpful, and a couple other good friends too. We were,
And Peter's the reason I got a record called Wronger anyway. He's my producer, pretty much, my executive producer on everything. So if he was into some of the early tracks I was playing him, and he was, gung-ho about some of the other ones, and I, did the thing. We followed through, made a record. It's kind of a, it's a stripped down rock band, if you will. It's kind of how I look at it. And because I can't get into, the Americana tag, because I'm not about it. I mean, the Americana side has always been a part of the replacements from my growing up, all that stuff, one way or the other. Whether you look at, If Only You Were Lonely as the B-side or for single, or the things that Peter has turned me on to over the years. So, what it's going to end up being as we go along, who knows what the hell, but, it's kind of like that. And the record's has more than just the trio that we tour as, but it's that practicality that we travel as a trio, financially speaking.
So I don't, the last couple of these you've done with a smart audience, you have asked them if they had questions for you guys.
We have.
If you guys have questions, please do, yes.
Did any of the songs on that cassette that you got show up on Sorry Ma?
Yeah, two of them, and then Raised in the City and Shut Up were both on the first album. The cassette they gave me, there's a picture of it in the book. It's Raised in the City was first, Shut Up was second, Shape Up was third, and a song called Don't Turn Me Down was fourth. And we put all of those four songs. The original demo is on the Sorry Ma box that we put out in 2001. It took 2021.
Oof. Yeah.
I was curious about your thoughts on the record Stink.
Oh, I actually have a lot of thoughts about it because it was a fun record to make. I have too many thoughts for the amount of time we probably have here. But one thing that bothers me about it is I keep hearing people talk about, like they talk about the Tim release last fall. All the press said, that it was their fourth album. And I was like, well, no, it was their fifth, and they go, well, no, the Sting seems to be forgotten, in a way. We called it a mini album, a lot of people call it an EP, but it's got 8 songs on it. It's really more than an EP.
An almost album.
Yeah. And also, that was a fun record to make. We recorded it all in one day, mixed a couple songs the next day. About 3 days later, we mixed the rest of them. This was in March that we did the recording and mixing, and then we got the record out in June without anybody knowing that we'd even made a record, which was really a feat in itself. I booked the time at the recording studio under a fake name, and I had to talk my partners into doing a record because Sorry Ma had just come out 6 months before. They were not really, the cycle hadn't gone around for them to be on a next record yet. So I remember saying to my partners when they were trying to talk me out of it, I have to say had played in Chicago and they'd done Kids Don't Follow, and my head exploded, and I thought, this is an anthem, this has to be recorded right now. So I told my partners we have to record this immediately, and they were balking, and I finally said, I'll fucking hand stamp jackets if I have to. And they took me up on it. And we hand stamped jackets for days and days and days. But
we had fun doing that, but boy, by the end of that, the stamps, and you can see someone going through we're running out of ink, so multiple stamps of kind of almost,
calluses. But it was, it's just such a great record. Somebody had to write "Fuck School," right? And
the whole process of it made it really even exponentially more special, and it still stands that way because of the hand stamping. We must have done that. So how many times did we go do that? It's like 500 records at a time or something. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, we did because we kept doing another pressing because it sold well. And then plus, we had the Minneapolis police do the intro thing, which was so funny. That was a real party that got busted, and our dear friend Terry Katzman he was their original sound man, and he had recorded the cops trying to shut the party down, and we one night after several beers, I'm sure we said, why don't we put this at the beginning of the record? And I remember doing a little test edit at Terry's apartment, Paul and I, and Terry, and when we put him on and butted the cops up against the intro to Kids Don't Follow, we were falling off the chairs laughing. It was so, we said, this is perfect. And it was just such a great moment. And also, they, If Only You Were Lonely had been an outlier song. And then on Sorry Ma, Johnny's Gonna Die had been an outlier song. And on Stink, they had a song called Go. And that was really unlike anything else they'd ever done before. And so that was really exciting too. And yeah, so then we slammed that record out in June and caught everybody by surprise. And one of the best writers ever in Minneapolis, Marty Keller, reviewed the record and he gave it an A+, which I don't think he'd ever given a record an A+ before. And he said it's one of the greatest records to ever come out of the land of 10,000 guitars. The Minnesota license plate say the land of 10,000 lakes. It was a great little riff that Marty came up with. But
Is he still around?
he's still around. He's still writing and he's still great.
Cool.
So there's,
Actually-
yes, Stink.
I actually have a question for you. I just listened to Trouble Boys, your narrating. So how did that come about? Were you doing that, and what was it like?
Well, I auditioned for it because I do voiceover, and I'm happy to say I beat John Cusack.
I didn't know that. Killer. I like it.
But it was a very unusual job, to say the least, because a lot of the way Bob Mayer had written the book was in sort of their speak, and I wanted to be as authentic as I could without trying to imitate somebody. But yeah, it's very surreal reading about your own stuff. But yeah, thanks for listening to that. Tell your friends.
Yeah.
This is for both the lads up there. How long after you genuinely finish a project do you start reminiscing, missing it?
Say that again.
So when you finish a project, like an album or something like that, how long after that do you start missing the process and feeling like you're reminiscing about it?
You know what? I kind of move on pretty quickly once I'm past the mix part. I spend so much time getting to that point, and letting the songs kind of evolve into a thing that by the time I'm kind of done with the mixing and all that stuff, I'm ready to move on and take it to the people, pretty much.
Okay, Peter, I told you I was going to ask you a different question, but I also told you I had about 12. So I changed questions
Go for
because
it.
you addressed it. And this sounds like a professor question, but I'll put it in this form. Compare and contrast Being on the Road with REM versus Being on the Road with the Replacements.
Night and day.
The whole chapter about REM, it seems like it's a lot different, but
I'll tell you, I guess when I started traveling with REM, they were good friends. I loved them as people as much as I loved their music. I'd gotten to know them, prior to taking the gig. But I sort of realized how civilized touring could be. But at the same time, I missed the madness. I think we were talking yesterday, and Tommy was saying something about, somebody asked, when did you realize that you sort of made it? And Tommy kind of said he wasn't sure that they ever really had that feeling. And I would disagree with that. I think that there were times where, after a great show, we would all,
We'd all feel good
supercharged.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as far as having a moment of clarity where I'm going, wow, what we're doing really feels good.
Yeah.
We inadvertently made a lot of things harder on ourselves. I can't count the ways, but the awkward, dysfunctional people that we were, it was kind of it was a hard one to kind of get over. To be honest with you.
But they were fun to travel with, and it was also, even though some of the shows were, weren't good for whatever reason, there was
Mostly
always
one.
There was always the next one, this is also one of those things that probably sounds ridiculous to say, but I can't tell you how many times I stood there and watched them in. Say we're in Wichita and there's 12 people in the room, and I thought, right now there can't be a better rock and roll band on the planet, because this is it, if you ask me.
Yeah.
And I felt that over and over and over again after hundreds of shows. That was, that's why wouldn't you want to keep doing that, right? Yeah.
On the stairs.
Peter, what is your assessment of the future of indie rock labels? Because everything we read is they're done.
Oh man, it's like right now is such a tough time in the record business, and I'm talking to so many people about it. And again, not to keep bringing up my son, but he's just starting to work in the record industry himself, and he's actually got an A&R job getting straight out of college, and he's suddenly facing the reality of, after interning at Warner Records in LA and an Interscope label and stuff, where he was really told that he could only turn in things that had a certain number of streams, per week or whatever. I mean, it was really, to me, just one of those like, wait, do people use their ears anymore to do this, or is it, why don't you just hire a statistician, to look for the things that are, reacting?
And they are.
Yeah, and they are, right, exactly. So it's a tough thing to say. I think that, I'm an optimistic person in this situation. I mean, great music is going to find a way to be heard. And I also think, you look at what we're dealing with right now, there's more music available to more people than ever before. And in some ways, how can that not be a good thing? But then there's just the traffic, the congestion of all that makes it so difficult. And it's like, once again, this is one of those things where, you have to, it's art versus commerce, and that's been going on, for centuries. But there has to be a way around it, and we will find a way around it, or somebody will, probably not me, but, somebody in the future, or maybe next week, hopefully. It's just, there's, and we constantly, there's hundreds of great records that people aren't hearing, and it's difficult to figure out how to make them heard. But, I remember being on an airplane not too long ago where, a few years back actually, when I was really frustrated, and I was thinking about getting, maybe just giving it up and getting out of the business. And I was talking to a guy next to me. I never talked to people on airplanes, but I talked to this guy who's really kind of friendly and had a nice chat. And I said I was thinking about getting out. And he said, but it seems to me if people like you leave, then all those other people that you don't like are going to be taken over. So don't you think you kind of... And I was like, he's right, goddammit.
Definitely right, because we've been talking about this for days. It's the people that, like the Peter Jespersons in the world, and there are still a lot of them out there, and they're actually coming back since vinyl has come back in a weird way. But what these guys did with the record store, it was the meeting place for every musician. It's kind of was our clubhouse, for every reason. And I have yet to see anything like that anywhere in the world. I've been everywhere, and I'm starting to see the beginnings of it coming back with like cool hip little record stores and stuff like that. But the actual enthusiasm these guys have, being the boots on the ground, if they loved a record, they were going to let you know why. And every time you walked in, they were going to be holding that fucker up, saying, you got to have this record. They'd play it for you and talk about it. It was important. And without those kind of people back then, there was a lot of record stores like Warfolk in other parts of the country that you guys probably dealt with and stuff too. But that kind of thing, all but gone away since since CDs took over. Basically, the first things they got rid of were the A&R, the local, regional record company people that would bring the new product to the records, the record stores and stuff like that. One of the things I am seeing, and I'm hoping it comes back further, is more people with that kind of enthusiasm, because bands like the Replacements, REM, all your favorite bands from that era, none of them would be anywhere if there weren't, independent record stores doing, doing the grunt work, the stuff to really turn the local people on. Now everyone keeps telling me, like, you got to get on the internet, get a post. Like, no, because there's millions of people posting, and it's not effective if it's that saturated. So I'm talking about going back to these days here and getting all the record stores of that caliber kind of involved again somehow. And nobody's really paying attention to that, I don't think. I think someone needs to kind of take the lead, might be me, but it's very important. Those guys, we're missing that right now. To me, I listen to pop music on the radio right now, and I just think it has zero soul to it. So much of it just sounds cookie cutter, AI generated, kind of, whatever. And these guys were the champions of a lot of bands that went on because of those record stores, And it's an important thing I think we need to get back and pay attention to. And boots on the ground, got to do the grunt work for us again to help make the good bands popular, not the crappy ones.
Well, we should wrap this up so that Peter can sign books.
Yeah.
And we can mingle and do all of that. Thanks, of course, to Robin and you guys are amazing. Peter, always good to see friendly faces from home. Friendly faces from home.
Yay. Chair to the table. Open it, please.
Yes, I'm going to turn it on in just a second.
What do you got?
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Can we get another round of applause for these lovely people? If you have not purchased the book, go buy a book. If you have purchased the book, go buy a book for somebody else. Give a sign, good talk to everybody. Thank you all for coming. It's always a pleasure.